For 6 years, I've watched my husband kiss our daughter goodnight while knowing a truth that could destroy him. She isn't biologically his, and I let his entire family believe a lie I'm too afraid to correct. Her name is Ellie Davis. She just turned 6 last month, and if you saw her at the park, you'd think she was the luckiest kid alive. She runs straight toward Richmond the second she spots him, arms wide, hair flying, yelling, "Daddy," like the word itself is a celebration. He always crouches down to catch her, like he's afraid she might shatter if he misses. Richmond Davis is not a dramatic man. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't slam doors, doesn't brood. He's steady in a way that makes people trust him instantly. At the airport, where he supervises ground operations, his team calls him the calm one. At home, that calm turns into quiet patience. The kind that sits on the floor building Lego towers for an hour without checking his phone once. Every night, he reads Ellie a story. Same routine. Bath, pajamas, 2 books, lights dimmed, then he stays until she falls asleep. Sometimes I stand in the hallway and listen. His voice gets softer near the end, almost like he doesn't want the day to finish. "Good night, Peanut," he whispers, brushing her hair back. "Daddy loves you more than airplanes." She always murmurs, half asleep, "More than dinosaurs?" Okay, maybe equal to dinosaurs. Then he kisses her forehead, lingers for a second like he's memorizing her face, and slips out quietly. That's when the guilt hits hardest. Not during arguments, not during holidays, not even when his parents gush about how much she looks like him. It's that tiny pause after the kiss, when the house is quiet and his love feels so absolute it almost hurts. Because biologically, he isn't her father. But in every way that actually matters, he is. We live in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, the kind where people decorate for every holiday and mow their lawns on Saturday mornings like it's a community sport. Our house isn't fancy, just a beige 2-story with a small porch and a swing set in the backyard that Richmond assembled himself one sweltering July weekend. He refused to hire anyone. "I want her to remember I built it," he said, wiping sweat off his neck with his T-shirt. Ellie helped by handing him the wrong screws and asking 100 questions. He thanked her for every single one like she was his project manager. On paper, we are painfully normal. I work at a dental clinic 3 days a week, cleaning teeth, making small talk, telling nervous patients to breathe through their nose. Richmond's schedule rotates, but he tries to be home for dinner whenever he can. We argue about bills, whose turn it is to do laundry, whether Ellie has had too much screen time. We grocery shop together on Sundays. We complain about gas prices. We forget to water the plants. Nothing about our life looks like a secret is festering underneath it. Richmond's parents live about 20 minutes away in an older split-level house they've owned forever. Susan, his mom, still has the same floral couch she had when Richmond was a kid. Mike, his dad, spends most of his time in the garage tinkering with things that don't need fixing. They adore Ellie in that all-consuming grandparent way that borders on ridiculous. She gets that from our side, Susan says constantly, even about things that are obviously from me. "Those long lashes? Definitely a Davis trait." I smile. I nod. I let it happen. Mike taught Ellie how to hold a flashlight while he changed the oil in his truck. She stood there like it was the most important job in the world. Later she told me, very seriously, "Grandpa says I'm his best assistant." They have framed photos of her everywhere. On the mantle. On the fridge. Even in the hallway leading to the bathroom. In most of them, Richmond is in the background, looking at her like she hung the moon. No one questions it. Why would they? Ellie looks enough like me that nobody comments on resemblance much. Brown hair, hazel eyes, pale skin that burns instead of tans. If anything, people say she has my smile. Richmond jokes that he contributed moral support. And he never asks for more than that. He's not obsessed with legacy or bloodlines. When friends complain about wanting sons to carry on the name, he rolls his eyes. "A kid is a kid," he told me once. "You show up, you love them, that's it." I almost told him then. The words were right there, pushing against my teeth. But we were sitting on the couch, Ellie asleep upstairs, his arm warm around my shoulders, and I couldn't figure out how to detonate our life without destroying him too. So I stayed quiet. Like I always do. The lie didn't start as a calculated decision. It grew slowly, like mold in a dark corner you don't notice until it's everywhere. One milestone at a time. First ultrasound. Moving in together. Engagement ring. Wedding planning. Baby shower. Each step made the truth feel less like something I could reveal and more like something that would only cause damage. Now it's not just my secret. It's woven into everyone's happiness. Last month, something shifted. Ellie came home with a thick packet of school paperwork in her backpack. Permission slips, emergency contacts, vaccination records, the usual avalanche of forms they send at the start of the year. I spread them out on the kitchen table after dinner while Richmond rinsed dishes. "Anything interesting?" he asked casually. "Just forms," I said. "Lots of forms." Then I hit the medical history section. Family conditions. Genetic disorders. Blood type information. It asked about both parents' backgrounds, grandparents' illnesses, hereditary risks. The kind of information people fill out without thinking. I stared at it for so long the words started to blur. Richmond came up behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. You okay? Yeah, just tired. He leaned down, scanning the page. Do you know if there's any heart stuff on your side? Or diabetes? My mom has high blood pressure, so I'll put that. My side. He said it so easily, like of course this information applied to him too. Like of course he was biologically connected to her in ways that mattered medically. My throat felt tight. No major issues, I said carefully. Just normal stuff. Good, he said, kissing the top of my head before going back to the sink. I didn't fill out the rest that night. I told myself I'd do it later. It's still sitting in a drawer, half completed, like a tiny time bomb made of paper. I thought that was the worst of it. Then Susan called. She was buzzing with excitement about Christmas plans, talking so fast I could barely follow. New decorations, a bigger tree, matching pajamas for everyone. I was half listening while packing Ellie's lunch for the next day. And I had the cutest idea, she said. What if we all do those DNA kits together? You know, the ancestry ones. Wouldn't that be fun? We could see where Ellie gets everything from. The knife slipped in my hand and nicked my finger. Not deep, but enough to sting. Oh, I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. Yeah, that's interesting. I saw a commercial for it, she continued. We could make it a whole activity. Mike's curious if we have Irish roots. And imagine how much Ellie would love seeing her family tree. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear her. All I could picture was a report arriving in the mail, Richmond opening it at the kitchen table, confusion turning into realization in slow motion. Richmond walked into the room right then, grabbing an apple from the counter. Who's that? Your mom, I said, handing him the phone before I could overthink it. He chatted with her for a minute, smiling, laughing, promising we'd come over Sunday. When he hung up, he tossed the apple core in the trash and said casually, Mom wants to do DNA kits for Christmas. Could be fun. Fun. Yeah, I managed. He shrugged. Ellie will probably be like 90% your side anyway. She definitely didn't get her sweet tooth from me. He grinned like this was harmless, like this was normal family stuff people did without fear. I smiled back. What else could I do? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Richmond breathe beside me, steady and peaceful. Every few minutes I checked the baby monitor out of habit, even though Ellie hasn't needed it in years. The little screen showed her sprawled across the bed, clutching a stuffed dinosaur he won for her at a county fair. I kept thinking about all the ways the truth could come out without me choosing it. A test. A medical emergency. Some random coincidence I couldn't control. For 6 years I've lived with the illusion that silence keeps everyone safe. Now it feels like silence is just borrowed time. And I don't know what happens when it runs out. 6 years earlier, before there was a house or a swing set or a little girl who called him daddy, my life was small in a way that felt manageable. I was 22, renting a cramped apartment with 2 other girls near campus, working mornings at a dental office and taking night classes because I still hadn't figured out what I wanted long term. Everything felt temporary, like I was waiting for my real life to start. Richmond was already part of that life, though not in the permanent way he is now. We'd been dating about 8 months. Long enough that he kept a toothbrush at my place and knew my coffee order. Not long enough that we'd talked seriously about marriage or kids or anything heavy. He was different from the guys I'd dated before. Quieter. Not trying to impress anyone. When we went out with my friends, he didn't dominate conversations or drink too much or flirt with waitresses. He just stayed close to me, hand warm at the small of my back, like he was making sure I never felt alone in a crowded room. My friends called him solid. Not exciting, not flashy. Just solid. The night everything changed was at Alyssa Grant's duplex, a place that always smelled faintly like vanilla candles and spilled beer. She had just gotten promoted at work and wanted to celebrate. It wasn't a wild party, just the usual mix of people from our friend group, loud music, plastic cups, everyone talking over each other. Richmond couldn't come. He was covering an overnight shift at the airport because someone had called out sick. He kissed me goodbye in my kitchen before leaving, apologizing like it was his fault. Go have fun, he said, brushing hair off my face. Text me when you get home. I will. Promise? I rolled my eyes, smiling. Yes, Dad. He laughed, pulled me into a hug, and for a second I almost stayed in instead. But Alyssa had been texting all day, and I didn't want to be the boring friend who bailed. Jason Mercer was already there when I arrived. He was one of those people everyone knew, even if they weren't close to him. Loud, charming, always buying rounds of drinks, always with a story that made people laugh. He worked nights at a sports bar and somehow still had the energy to be the center of attention at every gathering. Barbara, he shouted when he saw me, like I was a celebrity instead of just another person walking through the door. You made it. He handed me a drink before I could say no. Something sweet and strong that tasted mostly like fruit juice. I remember thinking the night felt normal. Boring, even. People dancing badly in the living room, someone arguing about sports, Alyssa trying to keep her cat from sneaking outside every time the door opened. At some point I texted Richmond a picture of the chaos with the caption, "Survived so far." He replied almost immediately, "Miss you." I smiled at my phone like an idiot. The rest of the night is not a clean timeline. It's fragments. Loud music, someone spilling a drink on my sleeve, the bathroom line taking forever, Jason leaning too close when he talked because the music was so loud. I remember feeling more tired than drunk, like my body was lagging behind my brain. I should have left earlier. I didn't. When people started drifting out, I realized my ride had already gone. Alyssa was busy cleaning up, half the lights turned on, the party atmosphere dissolving into that awkward after phase where no one quite knows what to do next. Jason said he could drive me home. I hesitated. Not because I thought he was dangerous, but because I barely knew him beyond group settings. Still, it was late, and the idea of calling Richmond to come get me after his shift felt unfair. "Yeah, okay," I said finally. I remember sitting in his car, the air smelling like fast food and cologne. He was talking about something, work, maybe, or some story about a customer, but I wasn't really listening. I just wanted to be home, in bed, done with the night. He missed the turn to my street. "Oops," he said lightly. "I'll just loop around." I didn't think much of it. He didn't loop around. What happened after that lives in my body more than my memory. The way you remember pain or fear without being able to narrate it cleanly. I froze. That's the simplest way to explain it. My brain went blank, like if I didn't react, it might stop being real. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I didn't say the right things because there were no right things. There was just this overwhelming sense that something irreversible was happening and I couldn't stop it. Afterward, he acted like nothing had happened. Like it was awkward but normal. He dropped me off at my apartment and said, "Text me when you get inside," the same way Richmond always did. I nodded. I don't even know why. Inside, my roommate was asleep. The apartment was dark and quiet. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection for a long time. My makeup was smudged. My hair was tangled. I didn't look like someone whose life had just split in half. I showered for what felt like hours. Hot water until my skin turned red, like I could wash the night off if I tried hard enough. I didn't call anyone. Not the police. Not my parents. Not Richmond. Especially not Richmond. I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling until morning, telling myself over and over that it wasn't what I thought it was. That I'd misread things. That I shouldn't blow it out of proportion. That it would be easier to pretend it didn't happen than to explain it. The next day, Jason texted, "You good?" I didn't reply. He didn't text again. Within a few weeks, he stopped showing up to group hangouts entirely. Someone said he'd started working more hours. Someone else said he might be moving out of state. No one seemed particularly concerned. Life kept moving like nothing had happened. I told myself that meant it wasn't a big deal. That if it were truly terrible, the world would have reacted somehow. There would have been consequences. Noise. Something. Instead, there was just silence. 2 months later, I was standing in the bathroom at work, staring at a plastic stick in my hand while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I'd been nauseous for days, exhausted all the time, my period late enough that even my denial couldn't explain it away. When the second line appeared, I felt the room tilt. My first thought wasn't about the baby. It wasn't about logistics or fear or even shock. It was Richmond. If he knows, he'll see me differently. He'll see me as broken. As damaged. As someone who brings chaos into his life. I slid down the wall and sat on the cold tile floor, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Somewhere outside the bathroom, someone was laughing, the sound weirdly normal against the panic exploding inside me. I stayed there until my break was over, then stuffed the test deep into my purse like hiding it might make it disappear. That night, Richmond came over with takeout because he said I sounded tired on the phone. He noticed right away that something was wrong. "Hey," he said gently, setting the bags down. "What's going on?" I had planned speeches in my head all day. Careful explanations, softened versions of the truth, ways to say it that wouldn't make everything implode. None of them came out. "I'm pregnant," I blurted. The silence that followed felt endless. Then he crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Okay," he said into my hair. "Okay, we'll figure this out." He didn't ask how. He didn't do math. He didn't pull away. He just held me like the only thing that mattered was that I wasn't alone. And in that moment, I made the decision that shaped everything that came after. I let him believe the baby was his. After I told Richmond I was pregnant, everything moved faster than I thought life was allowed to move. Not in a chaotic way. In a steady, determined way, like he had flipped some internal switch from boyfriend to father overnight. He started researching insurance plans, budgeting spreadsheets, safer cars, pediatricians we wouldn't need for months. He read articles on his phone while brushing his teeth. He watched YouTube videos about installing car seats long before there was even a baby to put in one. I kept waiting for the moment he'd pause and say, "Wait, are we sure about the timing, or should we get a test?" But it never came. Instead, he showed up. He came to every appointment he could, sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs in waiting rooms filled with women and magazines about pregnancy cravings. The first time we heard the heartbeat, he squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. His eyes went glassy, like he was trying not to cry in front of strangers. "That's our baby," he whispered. I nodded because my throat wouldn't work. He smiled in this stunned, disbelieving way. Wow. That word stayed with me. Not panic. Not fear. Just awe. When we left the clinic, he kept glancing at the ultrasound photo like it might disappear if he looked away too long. "I'm going to be someone's dad," he said quietly, almost to himself. The guilt started to settle into something heavier then. Before, it had been a secret floating in the background. Now it had weight. Shape. A heartbeat. We moved in together halfway through the pregnancy. My apartment lease was ending, and Richmond said it didn't make sense to pay for 2 places. His apartment was small but clean, everything arranged neatly like he didn't trust chaos not to spread if he gave it room. He cleared out a corner of the bedroom for a crib that didn't exist yet. Assembled a dresser he bought secondhand because babies have a lot of tiny clothes. I watched him measuring wall space for shelves, talking about safety anchors and outlet covers, like this was the most natural transition in the world. I kept thinking, if he knew, would he still be doing this? One night, we were lying in bed, the room dim except for the glow from the streetlight outside. He had one hand resting lightly on my stomach, not even consciously, just absent-mindedly like people do when they're attached to something fragile. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked. "I don't know. I kind of hope it's a girl." "Really?" "Yeah. I had a sister growing up. Girls are. I don't know. Softer, I guess." I stared at the ceiling, blinking hard. "You'll be a good dad." He turned his head toward me. "I'm terrified." That surprised me. He'd seemed so calm the whole time. "Why?" He shrugged, thumb brushing slow circles against my side. "Because I want to do it right. My dad worked all the time when I was little. I don't blame him, but I barely remember him being around. I don't want that for our kid. Our kid." The words landed like a bruise. A few weeks later, he proposed. Nothing flashy. Just a quiet evening at home, takeout containers still on the coffee table, Ellie kicking inside me for the first time. He pulled a small box from his pocket like he'd been carrying it all day waiting for the right moment. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because of the baby. I was going to ask anyway. I just don't want to waste any more time." I said yes before my brain caught up. His parents were ecstatic. Susan cried so hard during the announcement dinner that the waitress brought extra napkins. Mike shook Richmond's hand like he'd just closed a business deal. "About time," he said gruffly, but his eyes were suspiciously shiny. The wedding was small, rushed, practical. A rented hall, simple decorations, family, and a few close friends. I wore a dress that could accommodate my growing stomach. Richmond couldn't stop looking at me like I was something fragile and miraculous at the same time. During the vows, his voice broke. "I promise to take care of you," he said, not even reading from the paper anymore. "Both of you." I don't remember what I said back. Something about love and partnership and forever. Words people say because that's what weddings require. Inside, I felt like I was standing on a fault line. Ellie was born on a gray, rainy morning at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Labor was long and exhausting, the kind that erases time until everything becomes pain and fluorescent lights and voices telling you to breathe. Richmond never left my side. Not once. He held my hand through every contraction, wiped my forehead with a damp cloth, whispered encouragement like he believed in me more than I did. When she finally cried, this thin, angry little sound that somehow filled the whole room, he started crying too. Not loud sobs. Just tears streaming down his face, silent and unstoppable. The nurse placed her on my chest first, warm and slippery and unbelievably real. I stared at her tiny face, trying to reconcile this fragile person with the chaos that had brought her into existence. Then Richmond asked, almost shyly, "Can I hold her?" They handed her to him, and something shifted in the room. He cradled her like she was made of glass, eyes wide, terrified and reverent all at once. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi, baby girl. I'm your dad." That sentence lodged somewhere deep inside me. It hurt and soothed at the same time. He cut the cord. He stayed up the entire first night even though the nurses told him to rest. He learned how to swaddle from a tutorial on his phone and practiced until it stopped looking awkward. When she cried, he walked laps around the room humming off-key lullabies until she settled. Watching them together was unbearable and beautiful in equal measure. At home, the routine settled in slowly. Sleepless nights, endless laundry, bottles warming at 3 a.m., arguments about whose turn it was to get up. Normal new parent chaos. Richmond took on more than his share without complaint, changing diapers, rocking her back to sleep, letting me nap whenever he could. "You made her," he'd say whenever I protested. "Least I can do." His parents visited constantly. Susan brought casseroles and baby clothes and unsolicited advice. Mike assembled furniture with quiet efficiency, grumbling about instructions, but secretly enjoying himself. They hovered over Ellie like she was the first baby ever born. "She has Richmond's nose," Susan declared one afternoon, peering into the bassinet. I froze. Richmond laughed. "I don't even like my nose." "It's a good nose," she insisted. "Strong." I stared at Ellie's tiny face, trying to see what she saw. All I could think was, she has mine. She has the face of a child who will one day ask questions I don't know how to answer. As Ellie grew, so did Richmond's devotion. He documented everything. First smile, first laugh, first time she rolled over. His phone storage filled up with photos and videos, most of them slightly blurry because he was too busy being present to frame them perfectly. When she said Dada before Mama, he looked both guilty and ecstatic. I didn't teach her that, he said quickly, like I might accuse him. It's fine, I told him. It was more than fine. It was proof of how deeply she trusted him. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and find him standing over her crib, just watching her sleep. Not in a creepy way. In a protective, odd way, like he couldn't believe she was real and needed to double-check. She makes everything make sense, he said once when he noticed me in the doorway. You know? I didn't answer because I was afraid my voice would break. There were moments I almost told him. Late-night conversations when we were both exhausted and honest in ways daytime never allowed. Times when he opened up about his fears, his insecurities, how much being a father meant to him. Each time, the truth rose up like bile and then receded. Because what would telling him accomplish? It wouldn't change Ellie. It wouldn't undo the past. It would only inject doubt into something that felt pure. So I kept choosing silence. Years passed in a blur of birthday parties, daycare drop-offs, scraped knees, bedtime stories. Richmond never missed a school event if he could help it. He learned how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials. He let her paint his nails bright purple one weekend and left it on all week at work because she was proud of it. Real men wear sparkles, he told a coworker who teased him. Ellie worshipped him. Not in a distant hero way, but in that absolute, unquestioning way little kids love the person who makes them feel safe. And every time she wrapped her arms around his neck and said, I love you, Daddy, something inside me twisted. Because the longer this went on, the more impossible it became to imagine telling him without destroying all of it. By the time she started kindergarten, our life had settled into something stable. Predictable. Happy even. Which is exactly why the cracks started to feel so dangerous. Because secrets are easier to carry when everything is already broken. When things are good, they become unbearable. The first time I seriously considered telling Richmond the truth, it wasn't because of guilt. It was because I realized the secret no longer belonged only to me. Ellie had just started first grade, which meant a whole new level of school involvement, parent portals, emergency contacts, volunteer sign-ups, health forms that felt like they were asking for our entire family history going back to the Civil War. Most of it was routine. Annoying, but routine. Until it wasn't. Mrs. Linda Torres, the school nurse, called me one afternoon while I was at work. Hi, Barbara. Nothing urgent, she said in that calm, practiced tone that immediately made my stomach tighten anyway. We're just updating medical records, and Ellie's file is missing some information about family history. Things like hereditary conditions, blood type, that sort of thing. Oh, I said, gripping the edge of the counter in the sterilization room. Okay. If you and your husband could fill out the supplemental form, that would be great. It helps us in case of emergencies. My husband. Emergency. Blood type. Words that shouldn't have been threatening suddenly felt loaded. I'll talk to him, I said. That night, after dinner, I placed the form on the kitchen table like it was a bomb I was trying not to jostle. Richmond was wiping down the counters, humming to himself, Ellie coloring at the other end of the table. School stuff, he asked. Yeah, medical forms. He pulled out a chair and sat beside me, leaning over the page. Okay, let's see. His finger traced down the questions. Heart disease, diabetes, genetic disorders, allergies, blood types for both parents, grandparent conditions. He filled in his side easily, writing in neat block letters. High blood pressure on Susan's side. Arthritis for Mike. Nothing dramatic. Just the normal wear and tear of aging. Then he slid the pen toward me. Your turn. I stared at the blank spaces, my brain screaming that this was wrong, that I was about to participate in something I couldn't undo. Do we have to put everything? I asked. He shrugged. Probably just what you know. Why? No reason. Ellie looked up from her coloring book. Mommy, what's hereditary? Richmond smiled at her. It means things that run in families. Like how you got mom's curly hair. She beamed, satisfied, and went back to drawing. Curly hair. That was safe. Hair didn't require DNA tests or medical explanations. I filled in vague answers. No major issues. No known disorders. Skipped the blood type entirely, pretending I didn't remember mine even though I did. Richmond didn't question it. Why would he? He trusted me. Completely. That trust felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. A few weeks later, the second thread arrived smiling, enthusiastic, completely oblivious. We were at Susan and Mike's house for Sunday dinner, the kind of meal that somehow turns into an all-day event. Ellie was in the living room building a blanket fort with Mike, both of them laughing like conspirators. Richmond was outside helping Susan carry in potted plants she'd impulse bought at a garden center. I was alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes when Susan breezed in, cheeks flushed with excitement. I had the cutest idea, she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. For Christmas this year. Oh, I said lightly. No, you'll love it. I want to do one of those ancestry DNA kits. For everyone. Wouldn't that be fun? We could map out the whole family tree. The plate slipped in my hands, clattering loudly in the sink. Sorry, I muttered, forcing a smile. Just slippery. She didn't notice. She was already picturing it out loud. Mike's convinced we have Scottish roots, but I think there's some German in there. And imagine Ellie seeing where she comes from. Kids love that stuff. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The room felt too small, too bright. That's a big gift, I said carefully. Well, we'd only need one for her. Kids can use the same kits as adults. I checked. Of course she had. Richmond walked in at that moment, brushing dirt off his hands. Checked what? Susan lit up. DNA kits for Christmas. Isn't that fun? He laughed. Sure, why not? Ellie would get a kick out of it. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, something ugly might come out. She'll probably just come back as 100% chaos, he added, ruffling Ellie's hair when she ran in to show him her blanket fort. Daddy, come see. Grandpa says it's a castle. He followed her without hesitation, ducking into the living room with exaggerated seriousness, like this was a royal inspection. Susan turned back to me, smiling warmly. I'm so glad you think it's a good idea. I nodded because I didn't trust myself not to collapse. That night, back home, I couldn't sleep. Richmond was out cold beside me, one arm flung across his face the way he always slept when he was exhausted. I stared at the ceiling, counting the slow rhythm of his breathing. Every scenario played in my head on a loop. The test arriving in the mail. Him opening it casually. Ellie spitting into a tube, giggling because it felt like a game. Weeks passing. Then an email notification. Results ready. Confusion first. Maybe he'd assume there was a mistake. Maybe he'd call customer service. Maybe he'd laugh about it. Until he didn't. Until the realization landed. I pictured his face in that moment, the calm, steady man I knew replaced by something wounded and disbelieving. I pictured him turning to me, asking a question I couldn't answer without detonating everything. Why didn't you tell me? I rolled onto my side, clutching the blanket like it could anchor me. Richmond shifted in his sleep, instinctively pulling me closer. Even unconscious, he reached for me. That simple gesture made my throat tighten. He trusted me enough to sleep without defenses. A few days later, something else happened that made the walls feel like they were closing in. Richmond came home earlier than usual, looking quieter than normal. Not upset exactly, just thoughtful. Ellie ran to him as always, launching herself into his arms, chattering about a spelling test and a girl who brought cupcakes to school. He listened, smiling, carrying her around like she weighed nothing. After she went upstairs to play, he sat beside me on the couch and leaned back with a long sigh. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just weird day. I waited. One of the guys at work found out his kid isn't biologically his, he said finally. Ex-wife told him during a custody argument. My stomach dropped. He's a mess, Richmond continued quietly. Keeps saying he feels like his whole life was fake. I couldn't breathe. Does he still want to be in the kid's life? I asked, my voice barely audible. Of course, he said immediately. He loves the kid. That part doesn't change. Relief flickered for a split second. Then he added, but he said the betrayal is what's killing him. Not the kid. The lie. I stared at the floor, afraid he might see something on my face if I looked up. He said he wishes she'd just told him from the beginning, Richmond went on. He might have stayed anyway. But now he feels like he was robbed of the choice. Robbed of the choice. The words landed like a physical blow. Richmond rubbed his hands together, staring at nothing. I can't imagine doing that to someone you love. Building a whole life on a secret like that. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. This was the moment. The one I'd imagined for years. The perfect opening, handed to me without me having to create it. Tell him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Richmond, I said, my voice trembling. He turned toward me immediately, concern flashing across his face. What's wrong? Everything inside me screamed to tell the truth. To rip the bandage off before it was torn away accidentally. To stop living with this constant fear. Ellie's laughter drifted down the stairs from her bedroom. Richmond glanced toward the sound, smiling softly. She's in a good mood tonight. I pictured her face if he pulled away from her. If something in him shifted. If Daddy stopped meaning the same thing. The words died in my throat. Nothing, I said quickly. I just forgot to switch the laundry. He studied me for a second, like he wasn't entirely convinced, but then nodded. Okay. I stood up too fast, nearly knocking into the coffee table, and escaped to the laundry room where the roar of the dryer drowned out the sound of my breathing. I pressed my hands against the machine, eyes squeezed shut, trying not to fall apart. Because the truth wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to him. To Ellie. To everyone who loved her. And every day I waited, the fallout would only get worse. A week after the conversation about his coworker, a small cardboard box arrived on our doorstep. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. The return label said a shipping center in California. No company logo, no obvious branding. Just a plain box that felt too light for how heavy it suddenly made my hands feel. Ellie was the one who spotted it first when we pulled into the driveway after school pickup. Package, she shouted, already fumbling with her seatbelt. Careful, I said automatically, but my voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. She dragged it inside, leaving the door wide open behind her, excitement bouncing off her in waves. Richmond was in the kitchen making dinner, music playing quietly from his phone, something soft and acoustic he liked to put on when he cooked. Dad, we got something. He turned, smiling. Did we order something fun? I don't know. She plopped the box onto the table and looked at me expectantly, like I was the official opener of all mysteries. My hands were shaking as I reached for the scissors. Inside were 3 smaller kits. White boxes. Clean, simple packaging. Cheerful instructions printed in friendly fonts. Ancestry DNA. Susan hadn't waited for Christmas. Richmond picked one up, reading the back. Wow, she actually did it. Ellie bounced on her toes. What is it? It's a science thing, he said, crouching down beside her. We send in a sample, and they tell us where our family came from a long time ago. Like pirates? She asked, eyes wide. Maybe, he said gravely. We could be descended from very polite pirates. She gasped in delight. I felt like I might throw up. We don't have to do it tonight, I said quickly. It's probably complicated. Richmond glanced at me surprised. It looks pretty simple. I just mean, busy night. Homework. Baths. He studied my face for a moment longer than usual. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, sure. We can wait. Ellie pouted but accepted it after he promised they could read the instructions together later. That night, after she was asleep, the box sat on the kitchen counter like a silent threat. Richmond poured 2 glasses of water and slid one toward me. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. You've seemed off lately. I traced the rim of the glass with my finger. Just tired. He didn't look convinced. He leaned against the counter across from me, arms folded loosely, not defensive, just present. Barb, he said gently, if something's wrong, you can tell me. My chest tightened. He had no idea how loaded that sentence was. I looked at him properly then, really looked. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes from years of smiling. The small scar on his chin from falling off a bike as a kid. The way he stood steady, grounded, like nothing in the world could knock him off balance. Except this. I need to ask you something, I said. Okay. If, hypothetically, you found out something big about our past. Something that had been hidden for a long time. Would you want to know? He frowned slightly, thinking. Depends on what it is. Something that would hurt, I said. But also explain things. He was quiet for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. Finally, he said, I'd want the truth. Even if it sucked. My stomach twisted. Why? Because not knowing would mean someone decided for me, he said simply. And I don't like feeling manipulated. Manipulated. I swallowed hard. What if they were trying to protect you? He shrugged. Then I'd still be hurt. Just in a different way. Silence settled again, heavier than before. Upstairs, Ellie shifted in her sleep, the faint creak of her bed carrying through the floor. Richmond glanced toward the ceiling automatically, listening for signs she might wake up. That reflexive attention, that constant readiness to be there for her, felt like a knife twisting slowly. He looked back at me. Why are you asking? This was it. The edge of the cliff. My mouth opened. Closed. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Tell him. Tell him now, before the kits get opened, before the results come back, before the truth explodes instead of unfolds. But all I could see was Ellie's face if something changed. If he pulled away. If he needed space. If the easy warmth between them cooled even slightly. I saw a story online, I lied. Just made me think. He relaxed, the tension leaving his shoulders. Internet will do that. He reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. Whatever it is, we're okay. You know that, right? I nodded because I couldn't speak. He kissed my forehead, the same way he did to Ellie every night, then headed upstairs to bed. I stayed in the kitchen long after the house went quiet, staring at the box until my eyes burned. The next morning, Ellie woke up early and remembered the kits immediately. Can we do it today? Please. Richmond looked at me over her head, silently checking. I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Maybe this weekend, I said. Why not today? Because we have errands. She accepted it reluctantly, but I knew it was only a temporary delay. Later, while Richmond was at work and Ellie was at school, I took the box out of the cabinet where I'd hidden it. My hands were steady now, eerily calm, like I'd moved past panic into something colder. I read the instructions. Simple. Spit in the tube. Seal it. Mail it. That was all it would take to unravel 6 years of silence. I imagined throwing it away. Claiming it got lost. Saying it broke. 1,000 small lies to protect the big one. But that would only buy time. Eventually something else would happen. A medical emergency. A school project. A curious teenager with access to the internet. The future was full of landmines I couldn't see yet. I set the kit back in the box and closed the lid carefully, like it might explode if I moved too fast. That evening, Richmond came home exhausted, tie loosened, shoulders slumped. Ellie launched into his arms as usual, wrapping her legs around his waist while he spun her in a slow circle. "How's my girl?" he asked. "I missed you. I missed you more." "No, I missed you infinity." He laughed, pressing his face into her hair. "Impossible." I stood in the doorway watching them, the ache in my chest almost physical. This was real. This love. This family. It existed, regardless of biology, regardless of secrets, regardless of the past. But it also existed on borrowed time. After dinner, Ellie dragged him upstairs to read her new library books. I lingered at the bottom of the stairs, listening to his voice drift down, soft, animated, full of warmth. When he came back down, he found me sitting on the couch in the dark. "Why didn't you turn the lights on?" he asked, flicking the lamp switch. "I forgot." He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "You sure you're okay?" "No, not even a little." "I love you," I said suddenly. He smiled, surprised but pleased. "I love you too." The simplicity of it made my eyes sting. He leaned his head back against the couch, closing his eyes for a moment. "We're doing okay, right?" "Us?" "Yeah," I whispered. Because we were. That was the cruelest part. After a while, he went upstairs, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the house and the weight of a decision I couldn't postpone forever. On the kitchen counter, the box waited. Upstairs, the two people I loved most in the world slept peacefully, trusting that tomorrow would look like today. I sat there until the clock crept past midnight, staring at nothing, imagining two futures unfolding from this exact moment. In one, I tell him everything. The truth, raw and ugly and overdue. Maybe he understands. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe we rebuild. Maybe we don't. In the other, I say nothing. We mail the kits. Or we don't. We keep living inside the version of reality I constructed, hoping it never cracks. Both futures feel like losses. Just different kinds. I don't know which one hurts less. All I know is that the secret that once felt like protection now feels like a countdown, and I'm the only one who can hear it ticking. So if you were Richmond, loving a child with your whole heart, trusting your wife completely, believing your life is exactly what it seems, would you want the truth, even if it might destroy everything, or would you rather stay happy inside a lie you never knew existed?